Let's get started. So welcome to the May 26th SIG Node weekly meeting. We have a number of items from the agenda that we weren't able to cover last time and some new items that folks in the community are raising today. Trying to give priority to items that we did not cover last week that may have been pushed forward. So I think the first one there was, I want to make sure, Victor, you had a moment to talk through the testing update, given that there's a follow-on meeting right after this.
Yeah, sure. You ready? We had been making some progress in the, the testing meetings. The meeting was rescheduled to right after this one. The test spreadsheet has been updated. There are still a few items open, or a few slots open where tests haven't been signed up. So if you're interested, please do that. We had sort of been looking at, what priority should we be looking at these tests? And so from the last meeting, we sort of narrowed down to maybe focusing on the merge blocking first, and then release blocking, and then release informing. So we've got an idea, and I need to go through and update the spreadsheet and mark those appropriately. So I'll do that. I was out Friday and Monday, but one of the more interesting parts is last week, at the last update, you'll see we had another, I'll call it a fire drill, where SIG Node tests were breaking again. And I think these were the release blocking ones. And so, the email was sent out, and there was a few of us that got on. It was, I think it was me and Ed and Morgan, and debugged this thing. And what we realized is that some of the cost image testing had been silently failing for about the past 4 weeks. And the PR, this one, 17617, I think I did that to sort of update some images. We saw that, hey, we've got some new tests going here, and why are they intermittently failing? And that's when we sort of gained insight into, well, they had been silently failing for 4 weeks, and now they're failing intermittently. And it turned out we debugged, and Ed sort of figured out, hey, it's this one particular image. I think it was 73. That was the only one failing, after we speculated many other things. And so we replaced that with a newer image. And so now, unless something's happened in the past day or two, these should be running and they should be passing. And it just goes to show that I think we have probably a maintenance work here to do to keep an eye on these images, to make sure they are updated regularly, and that we avoid this fire drill going forward, because that's not much fun.
So the COS images in particular, I thought, are the ones that are running the Google container optimized OS. Is anyone, yes. Obviously that's a pain point for you probably to track, Victor, because that's not necessarily an OS that all of us can keep up to date on as well as others. Is anyone from Google able to help keep the community abreast to the situations that might be happening here?
Lynn and Karen, can you represent your side to answer? I think this is really reasonable of the request from the SIG Node.
Let me ask a question. And previously, has there been anyone sort of monitoring these images and doing maintenance to say, hey, these things are about to fall out, here come some new ones, let's test them and make sure to update the images in the file? Or is that is there a process for that, or no?
Previously, we do have the process. Actually, the team, I think, Lynn, we cannot hear you. So the team, internal in Google actually closely monitors not just cost image related, actually it's all the node E2E related stuff. So we basically carry most of the load, but I believe recently we have a lot of the change, not inside Google and outside Google and SIG Node also. So that's why this is for intercrack. So that's why I try to propose to the new people to monitor those kind of things. Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about it. So I just joined a little bit late, so I missed the part that Victor you said. Is that related with the cause image that causing testing failure?
Yes. So just a quick recap. What we realized is that if you look on the, I think it was 17617, that PR updated some of the cause images. And what we noticed is that, hey, it seemed to be some new tests running. And after we looked at it a bit, we realized that those cost tests were not running for approximately the last 4 weeks. It was a silent failure. And I think it was some regex expression. If Ed or Morgan only want to provide more details, or you can look in that issue, and there's a lot of stuff there. And we also updated the Slack discussion where you can see everything we went through. So basically, cost image was not running for the past 4 weeks. We updated the image. But all this was triggered by SIG Node kubelet on master was failing, which I think is the release blocking. So we got an email and said, and so, you know, we jumped on it. So what we really need is to be more proactive about, I think, keeping these test images updated, and also just in general monitoring the test so that when we do see these failures, we can get on them quickly. And
yeah, I know you are. Thank you for organizing that effort for fixing tests and stuff. So the multiple issues. One is short term, one is long term, right? So for short term, so we needed to. Can you please send me those the list of tests that are failing that needs a cause image updates or fix? I think we have. I'm not sure Roy joined today, but Roy is from cause team. Plus, cause is open source, so. Everybody can play around with it. It's an open source operating system from Google anyway. So, but I think we have somebody from cause team. You can take a look as well to help us. The short term, but long term is for those test failures. Do we have any alerting mechanism that like people can get an alert and know about it beforehand before it's causing release blocking issues?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, you know, in the SIG testing meetings, we are talking about what is the alerting mechanism. And so right now, if you look in some of these jobs files, some have an email alert and some are individuals. And probably what we need to do is go and clean that up. And even maybe even better than that would be to come up with an email alias that would be sent an email to folks that are really proactively monitoring this. That's how I got notified. There was an email from the CI team said, hey, SIG Node fell in release blocking. And so, you know, we go over and look at that. So I think we can make that a little bit better. So we have a discrete email list for that.
Okay. Yeah, so we just want to make that pop up to the people's, get people's attention and stuff, right? Okay.
One other thing I just wanted to mention, for the cost images, I know that there's the concept of release channels, like there's the stable channel that automatically gets updated with new cost images. Are we like pinning the image within the test, or are we using the release channels that within the test?
Yes, some of these jobs are hard-coded with specific image names. I actually think all of them are that we looked at. Ed, do you have any comments? Is Ed on?
Yeah, well, basically, there is a possibility to specify regexp for the images, and if, but it's like a bit better because we can just specify the series of the images, the milestone, like cos like 81, and that's it. Cos stable and 81, and then if cos releases like new image inside that milestone, the test will automatically like pick it up and use. However, if they stop releasing some like old milestone images that we are using, the test will silently skip them, and that's the problem. We should fix that.
I see. Got it.
Yeah, Roy.
Okay. Go ahead, Roy.
Yeah, I have closed monitor. Like recently, I just joined. Frankly, the SIG Node, like the workshop. I have closed the monitor all those like PRs. Yes, I agree with Ed. I think every time cause release image, we keep update the image is not scalable. Also, I noticed the code I added the comment. There's one cause image like the regs, right? I'm not sure why that's not used. That's supposed to pick up the latest image, but out of like 1,000 image, only like the 10 like show up. My question whether that is useful. If not useful, whether we can, for example, implement something like what Ed suggest, right? Because when I look at the cause image is that time has cause stable. I look at the history. I think that's the time cause has no LTS. Now cause has LTS. Whether we just specify the just what LTS always gets the latest image because cause team before this before this first like a pandemic, cause team mostly has bug or security is release those LTS is on demand. It's like 2 weeks or 1 month. It's like pretty stable. I think that should be, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt it. Can we separate off the Google host costs from the open source one? In the past, we have the policy and we want cost image. It is the minimal upgrade, not a friendly upgrade. We want that align what we are minimal support for the open source. So I'm the Google nerd, but right now I have to wear the open source hat. So let's separate off the Google production interest from the signal, the open source interest here. So we know this caused in the past, a long time back, caused a lot of the stability issue to the open source. So we have the policy, update of the signal release blocker, all the test cause image later, the last one. And then GKE, it is the separate story. Those is the two different of the qualification pipeline. Otherwise, basically, at open source, always have to do fix of those the GK specific problem and the block of the open source move forward. So let's just maintain of those old policy. This is what we defined the policy, and in the past, last couple of years, we've been follow those things. Sorry.
Yeah, we will follow that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so perhaps, Roy, are you going to be at the follow-up meeting, and maybe we can go into more details about what's the right way to move forward and make that happen?
Sure, I will follow up that that pull request. Yeah.
Okay.
So I will strongly suggest it defined. Maybe make sure the enforce of the policy and figure out why it's falling apart in the policy, and make sure we have a different cost image rollout policy from the GKE separately, and make sure it's not image operating system image related problem cause the stability issue to the open source signal. So that's more important. So the open source can move faster and can move forward based on the more reliable of the operating system here.
Yeah, so
and
sure.
Policy. Yeah.
I guess what I would like to understand, and maybe we can draw on this follow on, is there's obviously some institutional knowledge around the rollout of these images and tests, and just as long as the right representatives from that institution are on the right mailing list to get the alert, I think that's like the first step. And I know I personally do not know how without the help from folks at Google on this, we would have necessarily know what to update and when to update. So the guidance is appreciated. Were there other items, Victor, that you wanted to cover?
No, I think that is that is it for now. We have a follow-up meeting to where we'll go into more details after this meeting for the testing stuff. Thank you.
Okay. So we'll go top down again then, since Victor's topic didn't get covered last time. Next up here is sidecar ordering.
Yes, hello. I'm Rodrigo. Rata is my GitHub handle. I'm working with Alban. We have so let me present ourselves if you want. So I'm part of the Kubernetes organization, but haven't never worked in the SIG Node before, and I have not been very active in the recent past. But right now we're working with a client that will need this sidecar ordering as proposed in .kep functionality. Basically, we wanted to ask how it's best to proceed about upstreaming and merging the kep and the enhancement, especially about some concerns. Like I've been reading the whole kep discussion and trying to follow all the links. It's quite long, but especially the concerns that are there to address, so we can well see what they are and propose ways to address them. And also, like, maybe I'd like to have into account or have in mind that the kep, for example, helps with our client use case, but it's not perfect, and maybe will fall short in the future when different teams try to inject automatically multi-level sidecar dependencies. And also, I understand that some of the concerns were related to the termination grace period, but yeah, basically, so I would like to have a place with all the concerns, so we can see propose how to address, and maybe have more real world use cases in mind. So even if the kep doesn't address them, it's extensible or seems reasonable to address other more complicated use cases in the future. But yeah, wanted to say hi here and ask you, how do you think it's best to proceed?
Welcome, Rodrigo. So I know this particular kep has been a kep of broad interest. I think when we did a retro on this earlier in the year, Tim and Don and myself, and I forget who others, kind of drafted our concerns on the kep. For myself, my primary concern was that I felt that this was a feature, once implemented, was going to be turned on immediately when in alpha, and the ramifications of doing that were not going to be understood. And so my major issue was that I thought an alpha level criteria needed to include how we were going to respect termination sequencing among containers in a pod when just turning off the computer. And I thought if we didn't have a way to handle that gracefully, then we didn't know enough about the design space to proceed on the kep. And this was the first kep that introduced kind of a guaranteed shutdown sequence. And in that retro, I think Tim and myself called out for some use cases. Folks might say that's not a concern. I'm not worried about that. I can work around that. But then there were other use cases, like if you were using it for log forwarding, you might actually lose data if we didn't respect some of those scenarios. And so I thought that Tim, Huck, and I don't know, Rodrigo, if you were the group that came afterwards, was going to find some folks at Google to help flesh out that problem. And I know Mernal had volunteered on the Red Hat side to help support that. And so I'm losing track of names to know if Rodrigo, you were brought in by Tim, or if Mernal, maybe you can fill in what meetings might have happened since.
Sorry, I didn't follow. If I was brought up by Tim? No.
Yeah, so afterwards, Tim Hawkins said there were some engineers at Google that would be interested in solving the shutdown sequencing problem.
So,
No,
Derek,
I'm not at
David.
Google.
Yeah. So David Porter and I met, and I think these folks are from Kinvolk. So we need.
Yes, yeah, we are from Kinvolk, not Google.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said you were with Google and had a client. Okay, so yeah, so basically, I would recommend getting involved with Mernal and who is the individual at Google? I'm sorry, Mernal, who was looking at this.
David Porter.
Yeah.
And to me, understanding how to unblock this means I want to know that I can safely power down a host and respect node termination sequencing, even if you're a daemon set, a static pod, basically any valid way of getting a pod to that host. I want to know that we can always respect the shutdown sequence that Sidecar containers advertise.
Okay, so the blocker right now is more about the shutdown of the node, other than some other concerns about this cap?
Right. So my concern was that there were a lot of users running Kubernetes in like a virtual private cloud, and everything was great. But then I'm also aware of many users running Kubernetes in trains or planes or automobiles or just in different environments where the normal way one would do maintenance on that host, I don't want to ignore. And so I want to know that, like, can the kubelet respond to a computer being turned off and actually shut down sequence pods properly in the same way that like your standard Linux init system can do. I was trying to meet that bar.
Okay, but I mean, other than that, is there any other concern? Or
that was the major concern from my part. Maybe others had concerns.
Okay.
This is the major concern, and in general, but can I finish my sentence here? So I agree with the Dirk. There's the major concern is on the shutdown sequence, but beyond that, this is basically, it is another, besides the init container, this is another complexity added into the pod lifecycle management. So we've been talked to you about the pod lifecycle management in the past, like no matter it's the restart policy or it is the poor image policy, all those kind of things. And so there's the many attempt to revisit about the pod lifecycle management and the container lifecycle management. This is even like the compared to like the init container, I think this is even more, right? Because it's covered about the start time and also termination of time. So I do have the concern to keep adding those kind of things without really thinking about the whole of the pod life management. And especially like the later also have people talk about a memory policy and all those kind of things. So actually all it is have like the how we are going to change of the pod life cycle and the pod management in a long run. So that's kind of like my concern. And we keep add this ad hoc things and maybe work for some of customer, but not work for some other side of the customer. And that's introduce the complexity to the whole system.
Okay, do you know if this is written in more detail in some place or something we can look at? Or
so the node shutdown sequence was noted on that KEP in a comment, and then in the retro document I can link to afterwards.
No, yeah. I mean about the other.
The other ones are just kind of the observed outcomes of all the issues that engineers are presenting on behalf of their clients into these calls. We're keeping it all together in our heads is getting sometimes difficult. So sidecar containers comes up a lot when talking about topology alignment among containers in a pod with access to devices or CPUs or memory. And so just this morning in the resource management discussion we had, we were saying, do I want pod level or container level alignment? And in many of those cases, it said, well, I want pod level alignment of my CPUs in 99% of the scenarios, except maybe when it's a sidecar container, and only if that sidecar container was doing a particular network proxy or some situation I didn't care about. And so what we're discovering is like the more special types of containers we start to add to the pod spec, the more knock-on consequences it has for optimizing certain workloads and what we can do gets thought about. So debug containers was the other type of container that has been introduced, where you ask, okay, well, what does it mean when I add that container later? If the kubelet says, oh, I guarantee that I give you alignment resources and stuff. And so in general, that there's not one thing I can point you to, other than maybe you could watch the last like 2 months of SIG Node, where a number of crazy resource management topics have been brought up that each one of them, I think, has to ask, like, would a sidecar container break this or not?
Okay.
Derek,
so
I think attend today's resource management meeting, but I do have concern about the sidecar container, about those things, all those various topics. Yeah, it's the actual complexity, and I don't think what we have like the whole workflow and have the big picture yet so far. How we are going to do those things. Yeah.
So maybe what would be useful for the team at Kinvolk to provide is what is the use case that your client is expressing, and in what domain where the cap as defined would make sense? Is it a use case not identified on that cap? Is it an Envoy Istio style use case? Is it something else? Maybe your client's experience would be like the useful net new information.
Yeah, so service mesh is a use case. Matters gathering, also logging, like uploading logs after container termination. So as you mentioned, that it will interfere with the shutdown, but also some cryptographic bootstrap sidecar that runs as a daemon and renews certificates. And another type of sidecar is a sidecar that is also running and injects some certificates to the pod to use and rotates them. So yes, we can add those use cases and make sure that the gaps address them.
And maybe if it's okay, is it possible to say which like industry vertical it's in? So as an example, like, I don't know if Kevin's on the call. When Kevin this morning was talking about, well, when I run an AI ML workload on a Kubernetes cluster, I set up my kubelet as follows, and this is the type of pod I know that is running on this cluster that I want to have this use case on. Whereas like if I'm running a 5G workload, I might want to configure the kubelet differently. Or I'm running a general purpose workload, which
yeah, this is a general purpose workload running at first stage in the cloud, but it can run also in bare metal. But it's technology, like there's not 5G or something, or
yeah, because that latter one is the one I think that causes some concern, because many of those same use cases of I want to run a sidecar logging container, a metrics gathering container, or network proxy are also desired traits of those running like network functions. And then they often come in conflict with the goal of the performance desired around a network function to have these things run co-located or not. And so either way, if you're just understanding, if you were one of the more I don't want to say complicated, more performance sensitive, like industries is the other thing that would have been useful. But it sounds like you're not, so that's fine.
Yeah, it's a technology company performance, but no 5G or other constraints. Regarding the general complexity, something that I had in mind when looking at this, don't know if it makes sense, but I was thinking of making sidecars path part of the regular path. So like I've been looking at the PR, and it's basically an alpha feature, and if enabled, then if sidecar something, and maybe of course it will be an alpha feature, but so there will be that if. But for example, right now there's like a bool alike, like this container is sidecar or not, so we have this bool semantics, but maybe something more general can also be part of the regular path and satisfy the sidecar requirements. Like, for example, let's say it's instead of a bool, it's like an int, and basically that int defaults to the same number when you don't specify it. Let's say it's like order, each container has one and it has a default value. And what you do basically, it's you go in order and start all the sidecar, for example, order 0 containers, then order 1, then order 3, 2, 3, whatever, and in that case it's part of the regular path, and maybe the complexity is reduced. The tricky part about it is like you want for example in the current cap, and for it to work with a service mesh, you want to have, for example, the pre-stop hook of the first started sidecars run first to drain traffic for the service mesh, and then do all the rest of the shutdown. But maybe if it can be more, if the approach can be more generic and part of the regular path, would that help in that regard, or something along those lines, or what do you think?
So I think that was some feedback that was originally offered when the KEP was first proposed. I think I had asked, were we reaching like the need to have kind of systemd level pre-start, post-stop type of hooks or dependencies across units, but now within a pod? And I meant that in the positive case, not pejoratively, because it seemed like we were reaching a point of wanting to have more complicated graphs on startup and shutdown across containers and pods than maybe first envisioned. I think where the sidecar KEP got at this point was at a state of minimal complexity for most productive outcome, I guess, if you were to ask some folks who had reviewed it. And that there was one particular class of use case that kept being seen that maybe we didn't need to do the in-style approach you talked about. I think whether you do the in-style approach or you do sidecars as defined right now, to me what's important is that as an API, if we express a startup and shutdown sequencing order, our implementation needs to be rock solid on that, and not have any sacrifice on its ability to do that type of capability, independent of how the API at the end got presented. And so I think to me, the next step was to address gaps that exist today on pod termination before adding more debt around pod termination. And so I think pairing up with David and Mernal on that effort to close the gaps on termination is what I would recommend the team at Kinvolk do to help unblock something in this space. Mernal, I don't know if you've met Rodrigo before, but maybe you just introduce yourself back afterwards.
Yes, sure. So yeah, David and I are planning to meet again later this week. So I'll see if Rodrigo and Alban can also make it to that.
Oh, great. That would be perfect. Thank you.
And welcome to SIG Node, and hopefully we get to enjoy your presence in the weeks ahead. Next on the agenda was Ted. Do you want to talk through the PRs?
Yeah, so I want to talk about this static pod grace period issue first. So can I do a short demo?
Yeah, I need to make you a co-host. 1 second. Okay, you should have the options now.
Oh, just 1 second. Oh, sorry, it says Zoom has to quit first. Just 1 second.
I guess while Ted is coming back, Ryan or Seth or Mernal, I'm trying to catch up on the issue and to save time. Are we saying graceful termination is not respected on static pods? Do you guys know?
Yeah, that's the issue that is opened an upstream issue where yeah, it's not waiting for the termination grace period.
As captured on the static pod manifest itself or in the Kube API server?
Hello?
Okay, welcome back, Ted. Let me know if you are still able to share.
It says host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Okay, you should have options now.
Oh, just 1 second. Can you see? Let's see.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, let me go. Let me operate. So so starting from the middle, you can see basically this YAML defines two static pods, the scheduler and the third syncer. So we're looking at. Please look at so for rows we have three masters. So the bottom one, this 248 is not patched. So let me show the behavior on this node first. So we can see. Yeah, hopefully you can see at the top of the screen, you can see two containers corresponding to the scheduler and the third syncer. So so if I move this YAML out, the containers are gone immediately. So I'll show you. So I have another master node which is patched. That one being this 179.84. So we can see basically roughly the same two containers with similar rows. So this time, this is patched node. So if I moved the YAML out, the containers stay. So, by the way, my operation is within the grace period. So what I'm showing the audience is that this cancelable grace period. So within the grace period, if the request for a scheduler comes back, the previous containers would be shut down. So you can see the difference, 3 hour versus 20 second. And so this value is the pod ID. You can see from EBE to 29D. And this is container ID. You can also look at this first column from 13D 678 to new containers. Yeah, so basically that's the demo.
So quick question. The static manifest is primarily used for example, for kubeadm to deploy the control plane components. And this kind of like moving out the, or like removing the static manifest and then recreating is part of the upgrade procedure. So have you tried to test the kubeadm upgrade process with your patched version of kubelet?
Good question. I'll keep this in mind. Some background information for you and the audience. My employer has this installer, and I haven't been with.
Alex, OpenShift deploys static pods and has an operator that controls rollout of static pods for its installation. It's not using kubeadm, but it realizes a similar outcome for how the control plane is hosted. And so, Ted, what you were showing there was essentially simulating a rollout of the OpenShift control plane components. And what I was missing was, in the second part of your demo was the container getting a sig term, or what actually was happening on the grace period? What was your patch doing?
Well, maybe I can show briefly show the code.
Because basically every container should get the first signal to start termination, and the grace period was just the time it's allowed before it ultimately is shutting down. So is the kubelet not passing both values to the runtime in the case of static pods?
So yeah, so basically if you look at the description of the issue, so in the current behavior, it's neither nor. Now, neither does the kubelet respect the grace period, say for the API server, nor does kubelet give this grace period to the termination of the underlying container. So yeah, basically I'm showing the major portion of the patch. So this is in a pod clear. So the code in the middle is, I don't know if the font is big enough for the audience, but basically I can briefly go over it. So before calling the queue pod, so this middle part give the termination some grace period. So during which, so I try to poll whether there is intention to add this underlying static pod back. If that's the case, I come out of the waiting and log. So this second part also in the middle. So so I would retrieve the mirror pod and call this pod manager dot delete mirror pod after waiting for the grace period.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look at this closer, I guess. I think if the aggregate question is if a static pod expresses a termination grace period on the pod spec itself, I think there would be no disagreement that the kubelet should respect that. I'm not sure if that's what you're doing here though, versus just delaying sending sig kill for that period versus sending sig kill and then waiting that period for I'm sorry, before sending sig term or vice versa.
Yeah, so during the demo, I've shown that so the current behavior doesn't respect the grace period. Second part of the demo shows that I just want to save some time, since basically there are two scenarios I can demo. One is without moving the YAML back, the two containers from a previous lifecycle should terminate after the grace period. Since that involves some waiting, I omitted that part. The second dimension of a demo is if within the grace period, Jordan asked this on the issue. So if within the grace period, the YAML is put back, and basically the admin has the intention to re-establish the static pod, and then we don't have to wait for the full grace period. Of course, I know that there's not much time for everybody to digest my proposed solution. So I'm just briefly showing my code. The second issue I want to bring to the community's attention is pull request 91211. So this one, I can also do a brief summary. Basically, I forgot, I don't know the name of the user who opened the issue. However, basically I, myself, and Matt have tried out the proposed approach in 91211 multiple times. So basically, Matt, if you go to the underlying issue, I think I linked to, just 1 second. I can paste Matt's pod definition out.
So just to close on the first issue is important given the broad use of pods, and so I want to make sure we don't lose that one. And it sounds like if we are not respecting grace period, then that's a definite like P1 issue, and I'll work with you, Ted, to unblock that. I just don't, I'll have to see what your PR is doing, because that would have an impact to kubeadm and a variety of users of static manifest.
Yeah. Actually, I understand the issue. My understanding, Ted, I'm sorry, I haven't looked at your issue description yet, but my understanding based on your description here. So if you remove that file, the manifest file, so then the Kubernetes won't respect, because the object created at the API server, it is immediately removed, right? So you just saw the code. I believe that's what you just saw the code. So then there's the termination grace period that won't be respected. But if you are not remove that manifest file, so you basically just try to drain the node. Is that termination grace period will be respected or not? I believe in that case it will be respected, right?
Can you, sorry, can you say the second scenario one more time? I missed the first sentence.
Sure. The second scenario, it is you didn't remove that manifest from the node. You basically just say, oh, just drain the node. You're doing the drain the node, you mentioned the sig terms, all those kind of things. And then I think about Kubernetes will respect it, your the termination grace period, right?
Don, just to clarify, like, are you saying kube control drain, like normal drain?
the Kubernetes, the Kubernetes control drain. Yeah.
Yeah. So I believe that
I
it
think
explicitly ignores mirror pods and daemon sets. So no actual action will happen on mirror pod last I checked.
What do you mean? Can you clarify a little bit?
Like when it iterates all the pods on that node, it will skip a pod that's backed by a daemon set or a pod that's backed by a static pod. Like you won't actually get a delete action, last I recall, even sent to the API server. And even if you did, it would just be ignored. So the part I'm trying to work through is when you move the file out, did the kubelet have enough information of the mirror pod to properly respect termination grace period?
Because I can obviously see that the code tag just shared there. So when you move the file, then notice that when they immediately will delete off the mirror pod, right? So then in that API server, there's no such object anymore. So obviously that's the problem. This is why we cannot respect the termination grace period, because the mirror pod already removed.
Yeah, I think you need to look at this and make sure I have a proper understanding of the sequence, but I feel like there's enough smoke here that could have a broad enough impact that I want to make sure I understand the scenario, and I want to thank Ted for bringing it forward. On the next topic though, Ted, what did you want to discuss with logs?
I know there are still people who want to talk. So let me, one more sentence about the first topic. So I try to mimic the existing test, which use a CRI cuddle to list the processes. However, looks like in those tests, I only have access to worker node. So yeah, so in my first comment, yeah, if people can see the chat, I'm switching to the second PR. So you can see the pod definition proposed by Matt, which basically would keep logging to the given directory var log pods / default blah blah. So I have been using this pod definition along with the patch kubelet to test the fix. So in summary, without the fix, basically, let's say after the pod running for some time, we have 0.log, 1.log, etc., and of course with a subsidiary. A significant chunk of the logs for dead containers will not be cleaned. And the current behavior is, so that the pod can be long running and it can be talkative. So the current criteria is look at this, any given pod. So we only keep logs for the live container and one dead container. Or if there's no live container, then just the logs for the two dead containers. Yeah, so I hope David or Lantao can come review this 9.1.2.11. Yeah, that wraps up my portion. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Ted. I know we have 3 minutes here. Just quickly going through the agenda. I think, Mrinal, did you want to say much on the CRI?
No, nothing. So it's kind of ready. If we can get it merged, we can start making use of it. So folks can take a look. Yeah.
And then Vinay.
It's just a status update. I'm working on the main implementation to make the vertical resizing happen, the pod vertical scaling. I do have the code review, the API code review API changes have been out for a while. Tim and David have already looked at it. I have shared a change for the CRI, Kubernetes CRI cap, that other cap that we discussed last week. And I implemented the changes based on our discussion last week. And hopefully David or anyone else interested in looking at this, please take a look at it. And once I have the main code fairly close to ready, I'm gonna send all the 3 distinct PRs out to the main master branch instead of within my branch. So
is this the API code change #1 PR?
Yeah, that
okay.
is the one that is ready for review. That's the CRI cap, the changes to the CRI to support Windows and to return information about the currently configured limits from the runtime. So it's pretty small contained change, and hopefully it should be easy to review. The unit tests are kind of barely what's needed, just in case there's a lot of feedback and I need to change things, then I don't want to throw away a lot of work. And for the end-to-end tests, I have Shen Wang from IBM volunteered to help me. So I think we're going to make the code freeze date with the unit tests. It looks promising as of now. So that's where we are. That's all from me.
Okay. I think we got through the agenda. Thanks for everyone who brought issues forward. The PRs that need attention, we'll try to unblock. And for those who can attend the dedicated testing meeting after this, a big thank you to Victor for helping run that. And we'll see you all next week.
Yep. Thank you.